Hey folks, Dr. D here with another segment of audio production. Module 2, we're going to be talking about microphones and doing a microphone shootout. So let's go. In most recording studios you have several different types of microphones, and these microphones are basically one of the main tools that you're going to use to capture sound. Microphones can be used in such a way to EQ a sound before anything's done in post-production. So you can save yourself a lot of time if you understand the tone of a mic and you know what you want out of that sound. If you want more darkness or more brightness out of the sound, you can use a different type of mic to shape that sound and capture what you're looking for. Okay, so let's talk about the different types of microphones. The first microphone type we'll talk about is dynamic microphones. So for dynamic microphones, we've got 4 different styles out here today. We've got a Beta 52A, which is made by Shure. This is a bass drum, kick drum, bass microphone. These can be used on bass guitar amps. They can be used on kick drums as well, but this is a dynamic microphone that has a very low response to it. Frequency response can be found on any of the microphone boxes or the instruction manual, or you can look up online and see a frequency response curve for any microphone that pretty much exists. Another very common microphone and very versatile microphone is the SM57. These are used heavily on many things, from guitar amps, on drum kits, and for toms and snares, but this is like the standard workhorse of most situations, live or studio. These are very strong and bomb-proof microphones. Another microphone we have is the SM7B. This is your kind of broadcast style podcast microphone. This is also a wonderful dynamic microphone for vocal tracking. It's got a nice, warm, punchy sound that sometimes works a lot better on certain styles than maybe a high-end condenser mic would. Very versatile microphone, great for kick drums too. You can use this thing in many different ways. And then there's the SM58. This is a very common microphone for stage performance. This is your standard vocal mic. You'll see it in every bar or club on the stage. These things are pretty similar to the SM57, SM58. They're pretty similar microphones. The main difference is the cone, windscreen top of the microphone is a little bit more catered towards having your face on it in a live situation. But if you take the microphone apart, SM57s and 58s are basically almost the same exact design. So dynamic microphones are not as sensitive as other types of microphones like condenser microphones, because they work on a basis of having a diaphragm, most like a drum head, and that diaphragm is connected to a coil, and that coil is wrapped between 2 magnets, and these magnets have a plus and minus wire connected to them. So as you vibrate that membrane by talking into it or playing guitar into it, that variance in voltage is how you convert the sound pressure levels from acoustic sound and moving air particles into electrical signal. Alright, so next up we have condenser microphones. These are very useful for capturing acoustic instruments and the subtleties of and the nuances of a human voice, or a violin or a guitar or something like that. Condenser microphones come in various shapes and sizes. There are large diaphragm condenser microphones like the Blue Kiwi and the AKG 414, and then there are small diaphragm condenser microphones, much like the KM 184 Neumanns or Octavas or any of the other models and makes of these microphones. The deal with condenser microphones is they have a diaphragm, which is a very thin disc of a metallic material. It's very thin, and there's basically a plate diaphragm, then there's another plate behind it, and these two metallic plates are essentially like 1/1000th of an inch apart. Condenser microphones function, rather than with a magnet powering it, there is electrical charge that goes through here in 48 volts. So it's called phantom power, and you'll see on most mixing boards or interfaces there will be a phantom power or 48 volt switch to send electrical signal through this microphone. And as that signal bridges the gap between those two metallic diaphragms that are 1/1000th of an inch apart, as you speak into the microphone and vibrate that diaphragm against the back plate, that varies the voltage, and that variance in voltage is how you convert the sound pressure levels from acoustic sound and moving air particles into electrical signal. And because it's so sensitive, you can get a very rich response of high end and low end, and so usually these microphones have a very flat frequency response. But these are great for acoustic instruments and for vocals. They're very sensitive. A lot of condenser microphones will have not only a pad to turn the microphone's output down. So if you use this on a drum set or something and it's too loud, you can put a pad on it. Some of these also have EQ filters, maybe like a high pass filter, and various cardioid patterns, which will pick up sound from the front or the back or the sides, or omnidirectional all the way around. So depending on the model and make, these are great microphones and very versatile for a lot of situations and very sensitive. A third type of microphone is the ribbon microphone. This is more similar to a dynamic microphone in ways that it has a magnet powering the induction of sound pressure levels into electrical signal. The way that these microphones work is there is a metallic ribbon that is suspended between two magnets, and as you speak or play music into the microphone, the ribbon will vibrate, in reflection of the sound pressure levels that you're putting into it, and that various variants of the ribbon moving around between those two magnets, much like a dynamic microphone, converts that acoustic energy into electrical signal. Now there's various designs of these things, but they're all pretty similar. If you open them up, you can see the ribbon and you can see the magnets on either side. Most of these microphones function like a dynamic microphone and they don't require phantom power. Some do, like this Sterling mic here actually requires phantom power. Make sure that you check out the manual and you understand if your microphone can handle phantom power or requires phantom power. Some of the older vintage ribbon microphones, putting phantom power through the microphone can actually damage it and burn up the ribbon. So make sure that you understand the proper operation of your ribbon microphones. One other thing about ribbon microphones, they have a nice warm, rich sound. They can be very nice on vocals or some kind of acoustic instrument that you want to capture some of the warmth of it. But they, because there's a ribbon suspended on the upper portion of this microphone, it's bidirectional, meaning that it's going to pick up sound from the front as well as the back. So sometimes using these microphones can introduce phasing issues of the sound from the initial source hitting the mic and then the sound reflecting off the wall and bouncing back on the back end of the mic. You can get some weird phasings, but they can offer you a nice, rich, warm tone and work in a lot of different situations well. Okay, so before any recording session, it's a really good idea to plan out exactly what you want to do, where everything's going to go, what gear you need, and which inputs and which microphones you're going to use. So today we're going to do a microphone shootout with an acoustic guitar and a voice, basically singer-songwriter, and we're going to use various microphones on the guitar to kind of test and hear out the differences in the tones of these microphones, and kind of do like a mock recording session to build up your understanding and planning skills for something that might be much larger scale and more complex. So what I've done here is I've put together and planned out most of the session. The first thing you want to do is kind of get an idea of like which input you're going to use, which microphones you're going to use, and which instrument those are going to go on. I have the numbered inputs, which correspond to the patch bay that I'm going to use in the recording studio, and I have the instrument that is going to be being recorded and the microphone type that I will be using. We're going to record the guitar with 4 different types of microphones. We're going to use a small diaphragm condenser on the 12th fret of the guitar. We're going to try the SM7B, which is a dynamic microphone, AKG 414 on the sound hole, as well as the ribbon microphone, the Sterling ST170. Okay? Then for the voice, we're going to try 4 different microphones and compare the tones of those. We're going to do a large diaphragm with the Blue Kiwi. We're going to do the AKG 414. We're going to use the SM7B, and we're going to try the ribbon mic as well, the Sterling. Okay, when you're setting up your session in the DAW, it's a good idea to label each of your tracks and put this information in there so that the mixing engineer or whoever else you send the stems to have the relevant information and understand what those microphones are and what they're capturing. I have an equipment list, 8 XLR cables, 8 stands. We're also going to have a headphone mix going. So we're going to need one set of headphones for the performer. We're going to need one headphone amp to power that signal. We're going to need a TRS to TS mono cable. We're going to need a TRS cable to come out of the wall of the patch bay in the studio and go into the headphone amp. Sound baffles to build an isolated area to deaden the sound around the guitar so we don't have the sound of the room. We want to add reverb maybe later. We're going to use a windscreen. We're going to need that with the on the vocal tracks, and probably a chair and a music stand for the musician to have as capos and picks and whatever sitting out there. Okay, another thing is preamps or interface inputs you're going to use. So on the control room end of things with the engineer, they're going to create 8 tracks in a new session. They're going to label the tracks this way, and then they're going to need to patch each of these instruments into a specific preamp. So if you have several different preamps and interfaces to choose from, you might use like your higher end preamps that sound nice on the vocal tracks or whatever you want the guitar tracks to use. So that's another thing that you'll want to notate up there so that as the engineer sets up the session and is problem solving, routing and whatnot, you totally can reference this throughout the studio. Okay, so one thing I want to point out is as we've set up our microphones on the inside of that sound booth, one of the things you want to be careful about is being very organized. Being organized is key. The cables, we have them routed through the baffles and everything's marked into the patch bay that corresponds to our input list on the board. The cables with the extra cable length, to deal with that and manage your extra cable length, we've coiled up the cables basically with the over-under cable wrap. As we pull off of the top of the cable pile, we kind of neatly put the cables in nice little piles like that. So for headphone mixing, we have a TRS cable that's coming out of line connector 1, and that TRS cable is going to be feeding that stereo signal into a headphone amp, into the input of the headphone amp. The headphone amp requires power source, so we've run an extension cable over there so that we can easily plug this into the power supply. Then we have a pair of headphones which are coming out of the output 1 of the headphone mixer, and that gives the musician the ability to custom set the volume. Okay, so from the control room side, we need to create the session and make sure all of our routing coming from the recording studio through the patch bay is matched with the channels on the interfaces and matched with our DAW tracks and inputs. So we're running Pro Tools here. I'm going to create 8 new tracks for all of the microphones that we'll be using for the guitar and the voice, as well as an additional track for talkbacks so that the engineer can communicate through the headphone mix with the artist that's on the other side of the wall. So in Pro Tools, we're going to use Command-Shift-N for a Mac, or Control-Shift if you're using PC. We're going to create 8 mono audio tracks, actually 9 mono audio tracks, and we'll create those 9 tracks there. First thing we're going to do is label our tracks following the input list. Okay, so routing wise in the control room, we're going to need to patch all of the microphones that are connected to the patch bays on the exterior studio side and route those into the appropriate interface and preamps on our control room side. Okay, so one of those tools that we'll be using here is a patch snake. This is going to be what we run signal from the patch bay in the recording studio, from the recording studio, and then we're going to match those with the inputs. For routing our headphone mix out to the artist in the studio, we're going to use this TRS to splitter TS mono cable. The outputs on most of the interfaces will have a 1 through 8 if it's an 8-channel interface. And we're going to route that from outputs 1 and 2 with the mono split, some to stereo, and that's going to be going into our recording studio line number 1. We're going to route headphone signal out to the studio, and starting inside the DAW, I'm going to select all the tracks that I wish to send into the studio, and option and click and select all of the tracks at once, and then holding down option and shift, I can go to the first sends category and choose output 1 and 2 stereo. Now holding down command, I can click on the left side of that output nameplate there, and that exposes the faders where I can turn up the fader for the send that's going to come out of the back of the output of the interface. Okay, so next up we're going to talk about microphone placement. We've got our 4 different microphones set up and cables routed, with most acoustic guitar situations you want to capture kind of the high and the low end of the acoustic guitar. The 12th fret is kind of a epicenter of some of the more higher frequency sounds of the guitar, and then the sound hole is kind of a source of the lower end. So I have the small diaphragm condenser microphone, and what I'm going to want to do with this is position it maybe, anywhere from like 6 to 10 inches away. You can go closer if you want, but the thing is, the guitar player is going to be rocking around, probably moving a little bit. So, the fluctuation in the distance might be an issue, but I've got mine pointed directly at the 12th fret. These other microphones, I'm going to position them equally distant from the guitar body. One of the things you might deal with when you have multiple microphones on one sound source is a phasing issue, and that's when you have the microphones at different distances, and that means the sound's going to travel less distance to one mic and then a greater distance to the other mic. And it might just be milliseconds, but there will be kind of a shift in time when you're looking at the waveforms in your DAW. So the best thing you can try to do is triangulate the distance or get an equal distance among all of your microphones from the sound source. So I've got my ribbon, I've got my AKG 414, my large diaphragm, and I have my SM7B all kind of aimed near the sound hole, and I try to maintain kind of equal distance with all these mics to the sound source, and then we're going to track the guitar like this. Another thing we got going on here is we set up sound baffles in a way to sort of acoustically isolate this the best we can. In a lot of situations, if you aren't trying to get a certain room sound, these sound baffles can kind of deaden the sound that the microphone's going to pick up, and then you can add reverb and delay and other ambience of the room later in post-production, and that gives you some flexibility to match it with any other overdubbed instruments that were tracked in different room situations. So next up, we're going to record voice. We're going to use 4 different microphones. We have a Blue Kiwi, large diaphragm condenser set up there now. We're also going to use the AKG 414. We're going to use the SM7B dynamic mic, and we're going to try a ribbon mic as well. So you can see we kind of built a makeshift vocal booth over here with some sound baffles, and it kind of tightens up the sound of the vocal track so that we can do reverb and add room ambiance a little bit later in post-production.
Pop the cap and bite that bullet, smoke my pipe and write this song. Out here I'm free from judgment. Out here can do no wrong. Out there find inspiration. Out there find therapy. If I died on top that mountaintop, at least I would die free. One thing that I know, one thing that's for sure, got no regrets, at least not yet, and that's just how I roll. If you're feeling down, let's get out of this town. I know some place that'll free your soul. Free your soul. Gotta free your soul.